I'm an American. I pay $1,600 for a flat that has no bedroom. That's 2/3 of my income. I'm an American. I work 50 hours a week. I don't have health insurance. I'm an American. I couldn't afford to have a child even if I wanted to. I'm $7,000 in debt.
America still calls itself the land of opportunity. But for millions of people, survival now requires multiple jobs, constant debt, and the quiet fear of one unexpected bill. This is not a recession you can wait out. It's a structural breakdown hiding behind record stock prices and polished skylines. You are free to live how you want, until rent, food, healthcare, and insurance decide otherwise. The wealth is visible everywhere, yet unreachable for most. When full-time work no longer guarantees stability and six figures no longer means safety, something fundamental has failed. This is not a personal crisis. This is a system collapsing in real time. The collapse begins with arithmetic, not ideology, not politics, math. The basic cost of staying alive in the United States has detached from income reality, and once that happens, nothing else in the economy functions normally. Housing is the first pressure point. For decades, rent absorbing 25 to 30% of income was considered the upper limit of sustainability. That threshold is gone. In large parts of the country, rent now consumes 40%, 50%, even 70% of take-home pay. A $1,600 monthly rent, now considered cheap, requires roughly $65,000 to $70,000 in gross income to remain mathematically safe. Millions earn far less. This isn't lifestyle inflation, this is survival compression. Food follows closely behind. Grocery prices are up roughly 25 to 30% since 2020. But the real damage is not just higher prices, it's reduced choice. Consumers aren't trading down to cheaper brands anymore, they're cutting entire categories. Protein, fresh produce, and prepared food are quietly removed from budgets. When households start optimizing calories instead of nutrition, the system has already failed. Utilities complete the squeeze. Electricity, heating, water, trash, costs that cannot be deferred, have risen faster than wages in most states. A $300 to $500 monthly utility burden is no longer unusual. These bills don't negotiate, they don't pause. They arrive regardless of employment stability, health, or emergencies. Now layer transportation on top. Car payments averaging $700 plus per month, insurance premiums climbing double digits annually, fuel volatility. Mobility itself has become a fixed cost. Opting out is not realistic in most of the country. Without a car, income collapses. With one, expenses explode. Here is where reality breaks. When housing, food, utilities, and transportation alone consume 90 to 100% of net income, the concept of discretionary spending disappears. There is no buffer, no margin, no room for error. One late paycheck, one rent increase, one utility spike, and the household tips from fragile to insolvent. This is why traditional advice no longer applies. Budgeting cannot solve a gap this large. Working harder cannot outrun fixed costs that rise faster than wages. The system is demanding first-world productivity while imposing survival economy expenses. And once survival costs dominate every decision, everything downstream changes: how people work, how they borrow, how they plan, and how they think about the future. That pressure doesn't stay contained. It forces the next adaptation, turning to debt, credit, and multiple jobs just to keep the lights on. Once survival costs consume most income, work is supposed to close the gap. That was the promise. But that promise is now broken. Employment no longer guarantees stability because wages have stopped functioning as protection. The disconnect begins with pay growth. Over the past 4 decades, worker productivity has risen by roughly 60 to 70%, while real wages have barely moved. The economy extracts more output per worker than ever before, yet the share flowing back to the labor continues to shrink. In simple terms, people are working harder in a system that pays them less in real terms every year. This failure is no longer limited to low-wage work. Salaries that once signaled security no longer do. A $100,000 income after federal, state payroll taxes, healthcare premiums, and basic fixed costs can easily net closer to $65,000. In high-cost regions, that number collapses under rent, transportation, and insurance before savings even enter the equation. The income looks strong on paper. The lifestyle underneath it is fragile. At the lower end, the math is brutal. The federal minimum wage remains $7.25 an hour, unchanged since 2009. Even at $15 an hour, full-time annual pay barely clears $31,000 before taxes, below what many economists now consider basic subsistence in most metro areas. The result is a labor market where full-time no longer means self-sufficient. Job quality has also deteriorated. Benefits that once stabilized households, pensions, predictable schedules, employer-covered healthcare, have been stripped away or shifted onto workers. Today, income is often fragmented across multiple roles, variable hours, and short-term contracts. This isn't flexibility, it's instability disguised as opportunity. Hiring standards compound the pressure. Entry-level positions increasingly demand years of experience, specialized credentials, and constant availability, while offering pay that fails to cover basic expenses. Workers are asked to arrive fully trained, endlessly adaptable, and grateful, without compensation that reflects those demands. This is why multiple jobs have become normalized rather than exceptional. Not to get ahead, not to build wealth, simply to stay solvent. Labor has become a tool for damage control, not progress. The system no longer rewards effort with security. It rations survival in exchange for exhaustion. The psychological shift is profound. When work stops functioning as a stabilizer, long-term planning disappears. Saving becomes unrealistic. Risk-taking becomes dangerous. People stop thinking in years and start thinking in weeks. Careers collapse into schedules. Ambition narrows into endurance. And when wages fail to cover life, the system quietly pushes people toward the only remaining pressure valve. Not rest, not relief, but borrowing. Because when work can't stabilize income, the gap doesn't vanish. It gets financed. When wages stop covering life, the gap doesn't disappear. It gets financed. And this is where the system quietly changes shape, away from protection and toward punishment. Debt and credit have replaced what used to be social stability. The United States now runs on consumer leverage. Total household debt has crossed $17 trillion, with credit card balances alone exceeding $1.3 trillion, growing at double-digit rates. But this isn't discretionary borrowing. This is survival borrowing. Cards are no longer used for upgrades or emergencies. They are used to bridge rent gaps, cover groceries, delay utilities, and absorb medical bills that income can't handle. Credit has become a gatekeeper to basic life. Housing approvals, car access, insurance pricing, even employment screenings increasingly depend on a 3-digit score. Miss one payment, and the cost of living rises again through higher interest rates and penalties. The system doesn't ask why someone fell behind. It compounds the damage automatically. Interest is where the trap tightens. Average credit card APRs now exceed 21 to 24%, meaning a $5,000 balance can quietly generate over $1,200 a year in interest alone. That's not borrowing. That's a subscription to financial erosion. Buy now, pay later programs expand access further, breaking everyday purchases into invisible obligations that stack quietly until they snap back all at once. What makes this uniquely dangerous is timing. Debt is rising while savings are collapsing. The median American household holds less than $8,000 in liquid savings. Nearly 40% cannot cover a $400 emergency without borrowing or selling something. Credit fills the gap temporarily, but every dollar borrowed steals from the future at a premium. This is not accidental design. As traditional safety nets weakened, affordable housing, accessible healthcare, predictable wages, credit stepped in as the substitute. But credit doesn't stabilize, it extracts. It converts instability into long-term dependency, locking households into monthly obligations that persist even when income falls. The psychological effect is immediate. Decisions shift from what can I afford to what can I delay. Bills are triaged. Minimum payments become lifelines. Financial planning collapses into interest management. The economy keeps moving on paper, but households are running in place. Internationally, this model stands out. In many countries, access is based on cash flow and ability to pay. In the US, access is based on past borrowing behavior, regardless of current reality. Creditworthiness replaces dignity. Miss once, and everything costs more forever. This is why the system feels unforgiving. It doesn't absorb shocks, it amplifies them. And there is one category where this amplification turns fear into paralysis. Because the costs are unlimited, unavoidable, and often immediate. That pressure doesn't peak with debt. It peaks when health enters the equation. Debt strains households quietly. Healthcare breaks them suddenly. This is where financial pressure turns into fear because medical costs are the one category with no ceiling, no timing, and no opt-out. Healthcare in the United States no longer functions as protection. It functions as exposure. Annual health spending now exceeds $4.7 trillion, yet access has become more conditional, more expensive, and more punitive. Insurance premiums have surged far faster than wages, with individual plans routinely exceeding $1,200 to $1,800 per month before care even begins. For employer plans, the average family premium has crossed $24,000 per year, with workers directly covering a growing share. Coverage itself has been hollowed out. Deductibles averaging $5,000 to $9,000 mean insurance often activates only after a household has already absorbed a devastating financial hit. For millions, insurance exists on paper but not in practice. Care is delayed, tests are skipped, prescriptions are rationed. Not because people are irresponsible, but because the cost-benefit calculation has been reversed. This transforms illness into a financial threat rather than a medical one. A single ER visit can exceed $3,000. A routine imaging scan can cost $1,000 to $3,500 without negotiated pricing. A short hospital stay can generate bills larger than annual savings. Even insured patients routinely face surprise charges, denied claims, and out-of-network penalties that bypass all planning. The result is behavioral change at scale. Preventive care collapses. Minor symptoms are ignored until they become major. Mental health treatment, already scarce, becomes inaccessible as session costs push $150 to $250 per visit. Health decisions stop being about outcomes and start being about affordability. This fear reshapes financial behavior. Emergency funds are no longer savings buffers, they are healthcare shields. Debt from previous sections becomes permanent because medical bills arrive unpredictably and demand immediate payment. The credit system doesn't forgive illness, it records it. Healthcare also destabilizes employment itself. Job mobility drops as workers cling to coverage, even when wages are insufficient. Entrepreneurship and self-employment become riskier, not because income is uncertain, but because medical exposure is unlimited. Economic dynamism dies quietly under insurance lock-in. International comparisons make the distortion clearer. The US spends more per capita on healthcare than any nation on Earth, yet outcomes lag peers on life expectancy, infant mortality, and chronic disease management. Cost has decoupled from quality. Payment has decoupled from access. This is why healthcare operates as a financial weapon. It enforces compliance through fear. It discourages risk, mobility, and long-term planning. It teaches people that one diagnosis can erase years of effort. And when a system makes people afraid to get sick, the consequences don't stop at finances. They reshape entire generations, especially the young, who learn early that independence itself is dangerous. That pressure doesn't just delay adulthood, it locks it out entirely. When healthcare becomes a liability instead of a safeguard, independence stops being a milestone and starts feeling like a gamble. This is where the crisis shifts generationally. The economic system no longer fails people later in life. It blocks them at the beginning. Young adults are entering the workforce with higher credentials and lower margins than any generation before them. Tuition costs have risen over 170% since 2000, while entry-level wages, adjusted for inflation, have barely moved. Student loan balances now exceed $1.7 trillion, draining monthly income before rent, food, or insurance are even considered. Education, once marketed as the exit, has become another fixed cost. Housing seals the lock. Median rents have risen more than 30% since 2019, while starter home prices sit above $400,000 nationally. At current interest rates near 6 to 7%, the monthly payment on an average home exceeds $2,600 before taxes and insurance. That is not a stepping stone. It is a wall. Independence now requires either family wealth or financial risk that borders on reckless. This is why delayed adulthood is no longer cultural, it is mathematical. Living with parents has become a financial strategy, not a transition phase. Family support now substitutes for what wages used to provide: housing stability, emergency buffers, and healthcare coverage. Without that support, independence collapses under fixed costs immediately. Inheritance has quietly replaced income as the long-term stabilizer. Wealth transfer, not labor, increasingly determines who escapes precarity. Those without access to family assets face permanent instability, regardless of education or effort. The economy rewards proximity to capital, not contribution. This generational lock-in reshapes behavior. Major life decisions, marriage, children, relocation, are postponed or abandoned. Mobility declines as moving becomes financially dangerous. Risk tolerance evaporates. The future shrinks to short-term survival planning. Even homelessness has shifted. A growing share of the unhoused are employed not because work disappeared, but because independence became unaffordable. Shelter, not employment, is now the scarce resource. When having a job no longer guarantees a place to live, the social contract is already broken. The psychological cost compounds quickly. Young workers are taught early that effort does not equal progress, that stability is conditional, and that one misstep can erase years of momentum. Optimism fades before it has time to form. And when an entire generation cannot stand on its own, the consequences don't remain personal. They spill outward into housing markets, consumer demand, and social cohesion. Because once independence becomes unreachable, participation itself starts to collapse. Once independence collapses, the pressure concentrates in one place: housing. What was once shelter has been transformed into a financial instrument, and that transformation has consumed everything around it. Housing is no longer priced as a place to live. It is priced as an appreciating asset. Since 2012, national home prices have more than doubled, while median household income has risen less than 40%. That gap is the core distortion. Shelter costs are now tied to investor expectations, not local wages. Interest rates expose the damage. A home priced at $420,000, near the national median, at 6.5% interest generates a monthly payment exceeding $2,600 before taxes and insurance. That requires well over $100,000 in household income to remain stable. This is not a luxury market, this is the entry point. The bottom rung has been removed. Rent mirrors the same logic. Institutional ownership, algorithmic pricing, and consolidation have detached rents from affordability. Units are priced to maximize yield, not occupancy. The result is a paradox. Luxury apartments sitting partially empty while demand explodes at lower price points that no longer exist. Scarcity is engineered upward. This distortion bleeds into everything else. When housing absorbs excessive income, consumer spending contracts. Mobility collapses because moving costs become prohibitive. Labor markets tighten artificially as workers remain trapped geographically, unable to relocate for better opportunities. Housing also amplifies inequality faster than any other asset. Owners accumulate equity automatically through price appreciation, while renters transfer income upward indefinitely with no exit. This is why wealth gaps widen even in periods of economic growth. Housing doesn't just reflect inequality, it accelerates it. The social consequences are immediate. Multi-generational living expands. Informal housing arrangements rise. Vehicles, garages, and temporary spaces become substitutes for permanence. Not because people opt out, but because the system prices them out. When shelter becomes speculative, society fragments. Neighborhoods hollow. Community ties weaken. Stability erodes. Housing stops anchoring life and starts destabilizing it. And once people can't afford to live, they stop participating in the economy the way it depends on. They withdraw. They cut spending. They delay everything. When housing stops anchoring life, participation becomes optional. And that is where the economy quietly starts to hollow out. Not through panic, not through collapse headlines, through withdrawal. Consumer demand is built on one assumption: households have surplus after survival. That assumption is now false. With fixed costs absorbing income upstream, spending power downstream disappears. The result is not a spending slowdown, it is a structural demand retreat. Retail data already reflects this shift. Discretionary categories, furniture, apparel, electronics, home goods, have seen persistent volume declines even when nominal sales appear flat due to inflation. When prices rise 20 to 30% and unit sales fall, the illusion of stability masks real contraction. People are buying fewer things, less often, and only when forced. Savings buffers confirm the pattern. Personal savings rates have fallen near 3 to 4%, well below historical norms. Emergency reserves are depleted not to spend more, but to survive longer. Once savings vanish, consumption no longer rebounds, it freezes. This is why traditional stimulus signals fail. Rate cuts, tax credits, and seasonal discounts assume households are waiting to spend. They are not. They are exhausted. They are defensive. Every dollar is evaluated for risk, not enjoyment. Purchases are delayed indefinitely because future costs feel unknowable. Credit no longer stimulates demand either. High interest rates convert borrowing into avoidance. Financing a purchase at 22% APR is not an incentive. It's a deterrent. The debt channel that once pulled demand forward now suppresses it. What replaces consumption is triage. Spending collapses into essentials only. Grocery stores outperform malls. Repair replaces replacement. Staying home replaces going out. Entertainment becomes passive. The economy shifts from expansion to conservation without ever announcing it. This demand collapse is quiet because it doesn't look like a recession. Employment can remain nominally strong. Corporate earnings can hold through pricing power, but volume, the real engine, erodes underneath. And an economy that relies on endless spending cannot survive when millions stop participating. Businesses don't fail all at once. They shrink. They consolidate. They automate. They close silently. This is why the system feels stagnant even when metrics say otherwise. Demand isn't missing because people don't want things. It's missing because survival has crowded everything else out. When demand collapses quietly, it exposes a truth that was hidden for decades. This outcome was not accidental. The erosion of the middle class was engineered through a series of deliberate decisions that prioritized capital over labor, ownership over work, and extraction over stability. The shift begins in the late 1970s and accelerates through the 1980s, when economic policy pivoted away from wage growth and toward asset growth. Corporate tax reductions were justified under the promise that prosperity would trickle down. It didn't. Instead, profits concentrated upward. Since that pivot, productivity rose sharply while worker compensation flattened. The gap between what workers produce and what they are paid became permanent. Stock buybacks cemented this imbalance. Once restricted, they were fully legalized in the early 1980s. Since then, corporations have spent over $7 trillion buying back their own shares. That money did not go to wages, training, or price stability. It went to shareholders and executives. This single change redirected economic gains away from households and into financial markets. At the same time, labor protections weakened. Union participation fell from over 20% of workers to barely 10% today. As bargaining power collapsed, wages lost their anchor. Jobs became more flexible, which meant less predictable income, fewer benefits, and greater individual risk. Stability was rebranded as inefficiency. Retirement security followed the same path. Guaranteed pensions were replaced with 401ks, shifting responsibility from employers to individuals who were never trained to manage market risk. Retirement stopped being a promise and became a gamble. Market volatility now determines whether decades of work translate into dignity or insecurity. Offshoring accelerated the hollowing out. Manufacturing and skilled labor were relocated to maximize margins, not resilience. Entire regions lost their economic base. Communities were left with service work that paid less and offered no long-term security. The middle class shrank geographically before it shrank financially. Debt filled the gap. As wages stagnated, borrowing expanded. Household debt climbed while public investment declined. The economy continued growing, but only because future income was being pulled forward. This made the system appear stable while quietly increasing fragility. The 2008 financial crisis exposed the imbalance. Predatory lending collapsed the housing market. Millions lost homes and savings. Then came the turning point. Instead of restructuring the system, it was preserved. Banks were rescued. Asset prices were stabilized. Households were left to recover on their own. Those with capital bought distressed assets at scale. Ownership concentrated further. Housing never recovered its role as shelter. It became a financial vehicle. Institutional investors entered residential markets aggressively. Rent replaced mortgages. Payments flowed upward permanently. This single shift locked an entire generation out of ownership. Political influence followed money. The rise of unlimited political spending allowed wealth to shape policy directly. Regulatory capture replaced oversight. Antitrust enforcement weakened. Consolidation accelerated across housing, healthcare, food, media, and finance. Fewer firms controlled more of daily life, and pricing power followed. Then came the pandemic. Trillions were injected into the economy, but distribution mattered more than size. Asset holders benefited immediately. Stock markets surged. Real estate exploded. Inflation followed. Workers received temporary relief, then faced permanently higher costs. Since 2020, cumulative inflation has exceeded 25%, while wages failed to catch up. Low interest rates amplified the damage. Cheap money flooded asset markets. Housing prices spiked beyond income reality. When rates rose again, affordability collapsed completely. The ladder was pulled up, then removed. Today, the result is visible everywhere. The top 10% control roughly 70% of total wealth. The bottom half holds barely 2 to 3%. This is not imbalance, it is extraction. The middle class did not disappear because people stopped working hard. It disappeared because the system stopped rewarding work. Ownership became the only path to security, and access to ownership was restricted by design. This is why nothing feels temporary. This is why recovery never arrives. This is why every solution offered feels cosmetic. The structure is doing exactly what it was built to do. A system that feeds on labor but protects capital cannot be reformed gently. It doesn't bend. It breaks people first.